Chapter 1. The Encounter. The alien world stretched before them like a forbidden landscape, vast and unfamiliar, with towering trees that seemed to reach into the heavens, their bark twisting in impossible shapes that defied human logic. The skies overhead were a deep purple, not a star to be seen, save for the faint shimmer of distant constellations, their presence more felt than seen. It was a place where time seemed to warp, where the very air hummed with energy. The ground, soft and yielding, pulsed with strange bioluminescent plants that flickered in hues of green, blue, and orange, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. This world, still untouched by human hands, was a mystery waiting to be uncovered, yet it held a secret, one that the crew of the Orion's Hope was about to stumble upon, a secret that would change the course of their mission, their lives, and perhaps the galaxy itself. Captain Mason Weaver stood at the helm of the small expeditionary team, his eyes scanning the alien horizon through the porthole of the shuttle. He had been to many planets, studied countless civilizations, and encountered beings beyond imagination. But nothing had prepared him for this strange, uncharted world on the outer rim of the galaxy. The crew had come to explore, to discover resources, and perhaps learn more about the race that had once inhabited this land, the race that had left behind ruins scattered across the planet's surface. But they had not expected this. They had not expected her. The shuttle landed with a soft thud on the rocky surface, the low hum of the engines dying down as the landing gear settled into the ground. The atmosphere was breathable, thin, but enough for the crew to navigate without full environmental suits. The team gathered their equipment in silence, their movements sharp and methodical, each person aware that the unknown could bring both wonder and danger. The door to the shuttle hissed open, and Captain Weaver stepped out first, his boots crunching softly on the alien soil beneath him. Behind him, the rest of the team followed, Dr. Nadia Yates, the lead xenobiologist, and Lieutenant Carlos Rodriguez, the communications officer, among others. They stood in formation, ready to tackle whatever mysteries this new world had to offer. But nothing could have prepared them for what they saw next. A small figure emerged from the dense forest that bordered their landing zone. It was so tiny at first, just a shadow darting between the towering trees, that the crew didn't notice it right away. But then, it became clearer, more defined as the figure stepped into the clearing, her form small, delicate, and entirely alien. She was no taller than 4 feet, her limbs thin and fragile, her skin a pale lavender that shimmered like the surface of a dewy leaf under the morning sun. Her hair, if it could even be called hair, was a mass of swirling, silken tendrils that seemed to move with a life of their own, curling and shifting like smoke in the wind. Her face, framed by the tendrils of hair, was an otherworldly vision, large golden eyes, almost too large for her face, glimmering with curiosity but also with the unmistakable marks of fear. Her small, pointed ears twitched nervously as she glanced around, her body low to the ground, crouching in the shadows as though seeking shelter. There was an innocence in her appearance, but also a vulnerability that tugged at the heart. For a moment, there was no sound. The air seemed to still, as if the planet itself had paused, waiting for the next move. Captain Weaver blinked, his hand resting lightly on the side of his helmet, unsure of how to react. This was no standard contact. This was something new, something wholly unexpected. The girl, if she could be called a girl, stared at the crew with wide, fearful eyes, her body trembling as she remained rooted to the spot. She had clearly never seen humans before, and the sight of them standing before her seemed to paralyze her. The tiny alien girl's breaths came fast, shallow, her chest rising and falling as though she was fighting against some unseen force. Her pupils dilated with fear, and for a moment, she seemed as though she might flee back into the safety of the shadows from which she had emerged. Captain Weaver stepped forward cautiously, his voice low, trying to reassure her without startling her further. "We're not here to hurt you," he said, his words slow and deliberate. But the language barrier was immediate, and the girl didn't respond to his words. She only shrank further into herself, her trembling hands raised slightly in a defensive posture. Her expression was one of terror, not of anger or aggression. She didn't understand them, nor did she seem to understand why they were there. "We're explorers," Dr. Nadia Yates said, stepping forward now, her voice calm, but with a note of wonder. She had spent her life studying alien life, but even she was taken aback by the sight of this tiny, fragile creature. We come in peace. We mean you no harm." The alien girl's eyes darted between them, then back to the thick shadows of the forest, as though she were contemplating whether to run or to trust the strange beings standing before her. She stood frozen, her body tense, as though every part of her was ready to flee at any moment. The crew had seen fear before, alien or human. It was universal. But this was different. There was a desperation in her eyes, a silent plea for safety, for understanding. She didn't know them. She didn't know what they wanted, or if they could be trusted. She had no reason to think these humans were anything but a threat. Captain Weaver's heart ached for her. He could see the terror, and it made him question everything he had thought he knew about first contact. What had brought her here? Why was she alone? And where were her people? His mind raced with questions, but all he could do was approach her with the gentlest of gestures, trying to bridge the vast chasm of fear and uncertainty that separated them. The crew moved cautiously, keeping a safe distance but staying close enough to ensure that the girl didn't feel cornered. They remained as still as possible, allowing her to make the first move. It was clear that she was no threat, no danger to them, but they had to approach this situation with utmost care. They were in unknown territory, and their priority was to ensure her safety, to make her feel secure. But how could they do that when they couldn't even speak her language? The alien girl finally made a small move. Her trembling hand lowered slightly, her eyes still fixed on the humans. But there was something else there now, a flicker of curiosity, just beneath the surface of fear. She stepped closer, though it was clear she was still uncertain. She sniffed the air in a subtle, almost imperceptible way, her eyes narrowing as though she were trying to understand their scent, their presence. For a moment, nothing else happened. The world seemed to hold its breath. And then, with no warning, the girl dropped to her knees in front of Captain Weaver. The sudden movement startled him, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he watched as the tiny alien girl lowered her head to the ground, pressing her forehead against the dirt in a deep bow. It was an act of submission, of respect, or perhaps of fear. But it was clear that she wasn't just submitting to the humans. She was offering something, a gesture of trust, however fragile that trust was. Maximizing this moment, Captain Weaver gently knelt beside her, lowering himself to her level. The girl looked up, her wide golden eyes filled with uncertainty, but also with something else, something Max couldn't place. He held out his hand, carefully, slowly, offering her the opportunity to respond, to accept his presence. At first, the alien girl recoiled, but then, after a heartbeat that felt like an eternity, she hesitantly reached out, her tiny hand brushing lightly against his gloved fingers. It was as though the world had paused for just that moment, the two species, so different, yet connected in this fragile, silent moment of understanding. Max could see her, really see her. Beneath the fear, beneath the trembling, she was just a child, a being in need of care, in need of protection. The language barrier, the differences in appearance, were nothing compared to the humanity that they shared. This was the true first contact, not with the technology or the discoveries they had come for, but with another living, breathing soul, so vulnerable, so young, standing before them, asking for nothing but safety. "I'm not going to hurt you," Captain Weaver whispered again. But this time, his words held more weight. He didn't need to speak. He didn't need language. He just needed to show her that they weren't the enemy. They were her hope. As the moments passed, time seemed to stretch and bend. There was no urgency, no rush. Just the quiet understanding that hung between Captain Weaver and the small, trembling alien girl before him. The world around them was alive with the sounds of unknown creatures rustling in the alien underbrush, the soft hum of the Orion's hope still present in the background, as if the ship itself was waiting for them to make their next move. But here, in this clearing, everything else faded. It was just him and her, this fragile creature who had shown so much fear, yet somehow found the strength to extend a hand, to trust in the simplest, most universal of gestures. Captain Weaver sat back on his heels, maintaining his calm, his hand still held out in front of her. Her golden eyes glimmered in the soft light of the alien planet, fixed on him with an intensity that pierced through his protective suit, through the layers of hesitation and fear. For a moment, nothing happened. The girl's small form seemed to shrink back slightly, the weight of the encounter too much for her to handle all at once. She looked like she wanted to retreat, to disappear back into the wilderness she came from. But then, something changed. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, But there it was, a flicker of understanding, a softening in her stance. Her small hands, which had been clenched into fists, slowly unfolded, and she took a hesitant step forward. Max held his breath. This was a pivotal moment. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. He had seen alien species before, from a distance, from research facilities back home. But this was real. A living, breathing being who needed guidance, who needed understanding. The responsibility weighed heavily on his chest, but he didn't let it show. Instead, he remained still, his posture non-threatening, his face open and soft. He wasn't an expert in alien behavior, but his instincts told him to stay calm, to not make any sudden movements. The alien girl inched closer, each step slow, tentative, but undeniably curious. She extended one small hand toward his outstretched palm, her fingers brushing lightly against his gloved skin. The contact was almost electric, a jolt of awareness running through Max's arm, a feeling of connection so deep, it almost knocked the breath from his lungs. Her touch was warm, soft, and though it was so small, so delicate, Max couldn't help but feel the weight of the universe in that simple action. The girl pulled her hand back almost immediately, her face flickering with uncertainty, but she didn't run. She didn't recoil. Instead, she stood still, watching him, her head slightly tilted, her golden eyes filled with something that could only be described as hope. For a moment, Max forgot everything around him, the mission, the unknowns, the other crew members waiting back at the ship. There was only the girl in front of him, trembling but willing to reach out despite her fear. A part of him wanted to reach out again, to take her hand and show her the world she had just begun to step into, but he knew better. He couldn't push her. Not now. He took a deep breath and, in a calm voice, said, "It's okay. You're safe." Her eyes never left his as she stood there, still and quiet. Max was unsure if she understood, but somehow, he felt the weight of her gaze shift. It was like a moment of recognition, like the first spark of trust, and it sent a warmth rushing through him. Behind him, Dr. Yates and Lieutenant Rodriguez exchanged glances, standing at a careful distance, waiting for the captain to make the next move. They had both remained silent up until this point, aware that the situation was delicate. Dr. Yates, in particular, was fascinated by the sight of the alien girl, but she knew as much as Max did that now wasn't the time for probing questions or sudden gestures. The girl needed time. She needed space. Above all, she needed safety. Max stood slowly, taking care to keep his movements smooth and deliberate. He took another step back, breaking the tension of the moment, and gently gestured for the others to approach. "Let's give her some room," he said quietly. Nodding, Dr. Yates and Lieutenant Rodriguez began to move toward the back of the clearing, leaving Max alone with the tiny alien girl. The air seemed to lighten, and for the first time since landing on this unknown world, Max felt a sense of connection, a faint understanding between two species that could not have been more different. He watched the girl, her large golden eyes never straying from his figure, watching his every movement with careful attention. It was then that Max noticed something strange, a flicker of light behind the girl, a subtle shift in the air. The breeze seemed to pick up, rustling the alien plants around them, and Max saw something that made his blood run cold. There, just beyond the trees, a shadow moved, a figure, tall and ominous, emerging from the darkness of the forest. His heart raced as his training kicked in, and his hand instinctively reached for the sidearm at his waist. He wasn't sure who or what this new presence was, but it wasn't just a feeling of unease, it was a sense of danger, of something powerful, something foreign. The girl, sensing the shift in the air, immediately recoiled, her body tense, her golden eyes wide in panic. She darted backward, her hands raised defensively, looking frantically between Max and the shadows that were closing in on them. Max cursed under his breath. Whatever was happening, it was clear that they weren't alone and the girl wasn't the only one to be feared in this strange world. Chapter 2. The Unthinkable. Max stood rooted to the spot, his hand still hovering near his sidearm, his mind racing. The figure in the shadows moved closer, tall and imposing, yet still too far to identify clearly. The alien girl, whose trembling had escalated into frantic, fearful movements, backed up further into the trees, her eyes wide with panic. Her fragile form was so small compared to the hulking figure now advancing toward them. Max felt the rush of adrenaline coursing through him, a familiar surge that made his limbs heavy, his heart pounding. But he knew he couldn't act rashly, not yet. The girl needed him, needed protection, but from what? His crew stood frozen, unsure of how to react. Lieutenant Rodriguez had drawn his weapon, but Dr. Yates looked too mesmerized by the alien girl's distress to act. "Stay back," Max barked, his voice low and commanding, but steady. He wasn't sure who or what was coming at them, but he wasn't going to let this creature harm the girl or the rest of his team. The alien girl's eyes flicked to Max, then to the approaching shadow, and the fear in her gaze intensified. The figure stepped closer into the moonlight, revealing a creature so different from the fragile girl, so alien in shape and size that Max's breath caught in his throat. It was tall, at least 7 feet, and its body was wrapped in strange, thick, overlapping armor that resembled nothing Max had ever seen. Its face was obscured by a metal mask, but the body language, the stance, the way it moved was unmistakable. It wasn't human. It wasn't even close. But what struck Max the most was the way the alien girl's posture changed. She straightened, her trembling fading, replaced by something more familiar. She was no longer afraid, no longer cowering. Instead, her eyes softened with recognition. She didn't run, didn't shrink back as Max had expected. Instead, she stepped forward, slowly, cautiously, as if she were accepting the figure into her presence. For a moment, everything seemed to still. The creature, towering and silent, took a step forward, its heavy boots making a soft thud against the alien earth. The girl, tiny and delicate, stood unwavering. Max held his breath. Then, without warning, the alien girl extended her hand toward the imposing figure. It was a simple gesture, but one laden with significance. The two beings were connected in some way, more deeply than Max could possibly understand. It was a bond of kinship, of trust, of something ancient and unfathomable. Whatever fear had initially gripped her had evaporated in that moment. And with a deep, guttural voice, the figure spoke. "You are safe now, little one," it said. Max's grip on his weapon faltered, and in that instant, he realized he had misjudged everything. What had he been so afraid of? This figure wasn't a threat to the girl. It was her protector. "Who are you?" Max asked, his voice hoarse. But the alien only shook its head slightly, as if the question was irrelevant. "What matters now is that you found her," the alien said. Max's mind spun. He was no longer just an observer in this encounter. He was part of it, and he had to learn fast. But the unspoken truth behind those words was becoming clearer. The girl wasn't the only one who had been lost. Max stood frozen, his eyes never leaving the towering figure now facing him, and the trembling alien girl who had, moments before, been so frightened. The shock of the situation rippled through his mind, scrambling his thoughts, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The creature before him, this towering being in alien armor, was unlike anything he had encountered in all his years of exploration and study. Yet, in its silent presence, there was something that spoke louder than words. It wasn't just a soldier. It wasn't an enemy. It was, somehow, a protector. The girl, still so fragile in her form, was now standing tall, a sense of calm and recognition washing over her. The terror that had gripped her body moments ago was now gone, replaced by a steady composure, as if she had found something she had been searching for, something she had been waiting for, hidden in the shadows of this strange world. The connection between them, this unspoken bond between the tiny alien girl and the towering armored figure, was unmistakable. Max's hand hovered nervously over his sidearm, though he didn't draw it. His instincts were conflicted. The situation wasn't what it had seemed at first. The alien girl wasn't an innocent bystander, stranded and defenseless in a dangerous new world. She was part of something far larger, something ancient and unknown. She wasn't alone, and neither was he. The towering figure looked at him then, its hidden eyes obscured behind the sleek visor of its helmet, but Max could feel the weight of its gaze. The creature spoke again, its voice deep and reverberating through the silence, carrying with it a commanding force that made Max's chest tighten. "You don't understand yet," the alien figure said, its words heavy with meaning. "But she is not your prisoner. She is not a victim. She is the key." Max stood tall, feeling his pulse in his throat, trying to calm himself. There was so much he didn't understand, but his curiosity, mixed with a newfound sense of urgency, propelled him forward. "The key to what?" he asked, his voice steady, though his hands still shook beneath his suit. The armored figure paused, a strange kind of reverence in its posture. It took a step closer, each movement deliberate and calculated, before answering. This planet. This system. It was abandoned. But not by us. Not by those who created it. We are guardians. And so is she. Max was taken aback, his mind trying to process the implications of the statement. Guardians. The word echoed in his ears, resonating with some deep, ancient truth that neither he nor the crew had anticipated when they first made contact with this alien world. And then it hit him, the strange, shimmering power he had felt in the presence of the girl earlier, the sense of potential locked within her, buried beneath her fear. Her. Max whispered, his voice barely audible. The alien figure nodded once, the movement slow but resolute. She is more than what you see. She is of the ancient line. Her people were the creators of this system, the architects of its design. She carries their legacy, their power. Max's head spun, his mind racing. The girl, this trembling, delicate being, was part of something far greater than anything he had ever encountered. And now, she stood at the center of something massive, something that could change everything. The weight of the realization settled in, and Max knew with absolute certainty that his mission had shifted entirely. This wasn't just an exploration anymore. It was a pivotal moment in the history of two species, a discovery that could unlock the secrets of an entire galaxy. But as the armored figure and the girl locked eyes once more, Max knew that whatever power lay within her, it wasn't something that could be wielded recklessly. The Guardians, whoever they were, had protected it for so long, and now, it seemed, it was time to bring that power back into the world. We need to help her, the figure said, its voice low, almost a command. She must reclaim what was taken. Max's heart raced again, but this time it was not from fear. It was from the realization that he had a part to play in this cosmic tale. He didn't know how or why, but he understood that he had to help the girl. She was no longer just a lost, terrified creature on an alien world. She was part of something much greater, something that, if left unchecked, could destroy everything. But how? How could he help her? He had no training for this. No knowledge of the intricacies of alien civilizations or the secrets buried beneath this strange world. He was just a mechanic, a scavenger, someone who had spent his life repairing broken ships and machines. He had no place in this, at least, that's what he thought. But something about the girl's eyes, the way they locked onto his, unblinking, trusting, told him that he had to be more than just a bystander. He had to act. He had to protect her. I don't understand all of this, Max said slowly, taking a step forward. But I'll do whatever I can to help. If she's the key, then we need to protect her. We need to get her out of here, away from whatever dangers are out there. The armored figure nodded again, its body language almost imperceptible beneath the heavy armor, but Max could feel the weight of its approval. Good, it said. But first, we must awaken her. Chapter 3. The Awakening. Max wasn't prepared for what happened next. The alien girl, once so timid, so fragile, began to stand taller. Her body, so small in comparison to the towering figure beside her, seemed to swell with purpose. She stepped forward, her movements now steady and sure, and in that moment, something changed within her. It was as if a switch had been flipped, the fear and hesitation falling away like a discarded cloak. She was no longer the frightened creature Max had first encountered. She was the key, her presence, her very being, a beacon to the universe. As she stood there, in the center of the clearing, her eyes closed, and for a brief moment, everything seemed to stop. The alien world around them, the soft rustling of plants, the faint chirps of creatures in the distance, all fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Max watched in awe as the girl extended her arms outward, palms facing upward, and then she began to glow. It was subtle at first, a soft light that began to emanate from her skin, but soon it grew stronger, brighter, until her entire form was bathed in a radiant, ethereal glow. The energy that pulsed from her body resonated with something deep inside Max. It wasn't just power. It was ancient energy, ancient knowledge, flowing from her, enveloping everything around them. The air crackled with electricity, and the ground beneath their feet trembled ever so slightly. The armored figure stepped back, its eyes never leaving the girl. It was as though it understood exactly what was happening, as though it had witnessed this countless times before. Max, however, was caught between awe and confusion. He had no idea what was happening, but he knew one thing for certain. They were witnessing something extraordinary, something that would change everything. The girl's eyes fluttered open, and for the first time, they were not filled with fear, but with a calm understanding and understanding that seemed to radiate outward. She looked at Max, and for a brief moment, he felt as though she was seeing into his very soul. She knew him. She trusted him. "You must follow," she said, her voice soft yet filled with an undeniable authority. The words were strange, melodic, but they were understood, and in that moment, Max knew that she was no longer just a scared alien. She had become the embodiment of something greater. She had awakened to the power within her, the power that had been dormant for so long. And with that power came a mission, a purpose. Max didn't hesitate. He had come here to explore, to discover, and now, he had found his purpose. "Lead the way," he said, his voice steady. The girl nodded, and with a single motion, she gestured for them to follow her. Max, Dr. Yates, and Lieutenant Rodriguez followed, their steps hesitant at first, but as they moved toward the heart of the alien world, something shifted. The path ahead was unknown, but it didn't matter. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The tiny alien girl, the one who had trembled at the sight of them, was now leading them forward. She was the key to something unimaginable, something powerful enough to alter the very fabric of the galaxy. And as they walked, Max realized that he wasn't just a witness to history. He was part of it. Max followed closely behind the tiny alien girl, who now walked with an air of authority, a silent determination radiating from her as the glowing energy around her continued to pulse. The atmosphere of the alien world had shifted entirely. The once static air seemed to hum with power, charged with an unknown force that Max could neither comprehend nor ignore. It was as though the planet itself was responding to her presence, responding to her awakening. The ground beneath their feet felt alive, shifting with subtle vibrations, the trees and plants swaying as if in response to an unseen energy. Every step they took felt momentous, as if they were traversing not just a physical distance, but an epoch of time, an untold history. Max's heart raced in his chest. The girl who had been nothing more than a frightened, trembling being when they had first encountered her was now guiding them through this alien terrain with a sense of purpose that both awed and unnerved him. She was no longer just the fragile creature they had discovered, but the very key to something far greater. The realization hit Max hard. Whatever had been hidden on this planet, whatever secrets lay beneath its surface, had just begun to stir, and it was all tied to her. The power that emanated from her, that filled the air and charged the very ground they walked on, was like nothing he had ever encountered. It was ancient, primal, and undeniably potent. The forest around them began to open up, revealing a clearing at the edge of a massive cliff. The view below was breathtaking, a vast expanse of alien landscapes stretching out to the horizon. But Max's attention was drawn to something far more important, the massive structure that stood before them. It was a ruin, yet not like any ruin Max had ever seen before. Towering spires, built from materials that seemed to shimmer in the moonlight, rose from the ground like the remains of some ancient citadel. But this wasn't just a city that had fallen into disrepair, it was something far more profound. It was a monument to an advanced civilization, a civilization that had vanished, leaving only the ruins of their once great achievements behind. The girl, the one who had become their guide, stopped at the edge of the clearing, her glowing form casting long shadows across the ancient stone. She turned to face Max, her golden eyes meeting his gaze with a look that was both resolute and understanding. "This is where it began," she said, her voice soft, yet carrying an undeniable weight. "This is where my people lived, and where they fell." Max couldn't help but be drawn to the ruins. He took a cautious step forward, his eyes scanning the stonework, the carvings, the symbols that adorned every surface. It was clear that this place had once been alive with activity, with purpose. But now, it lay abandoned, its creators lost to the ages, its purpose shrouded in mystery. The girl spoke again, her voice tinged with a sadness that Max hadn't expected. They were once a race of great power, of knowledge beyond comprehension. But greed and fear consumed them. They sought to control what they could not understand, and in doing so, they destroyed themselves. Max felt a chill run down his spine as the weight of her words sank in. This wasn't just a story of an alien civilization falling to ruin. It was a warning, a reminder of the dangers of unchecked power, of knowledge that could corrupt and destroy. But what had the girl meant when she said that she was the key? What power did she hold? And why had she been left alone, abandoned on this planet? As if reading his thoughts, the girl turned and began walking toward the massive structure, the light around her intensifying with each step. Max and the crew followed, their footsteps quiet against the strange stone ground. The air grew thick with energy as they neared the entrance, the ruins whispering secrets that Max could feel but not fully understand. The girl raised her hand, and with a soft, almost inaudible hum, the massive doors of the structure slowly began to open. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the ancient mechanism groaned to life, revealing a dark, cavernous interior. Inside, the walls were covered in more of the same glowing symbols that Max had seen earlier, and at the far end of the room stood what appeared to be a massive chamber, filled with a pulsating light. The air was thick with the scent of old machinery, ancient energy, and something else something Max couldn't quite place. "This is the heart," the girl said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "Where the power lies. Where everything began." Max and the crew stepped into the chamber, their footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. The light grew brighter, more intense, as if the very air around them was alive with energy. And then, in the center of the room, Max saw it, a massive, intricate device, unlike anything he had ever seen before. It was made of alien metals, strange alloys that shimmered and pulsed with light. The device was shaped like a crystal, but much larger, easily 10 times the size of a human, and at its center, there was a swirling mass of energy, a core that seemed to bend the very fabric of space itself. "This is the power," the girl said, her voice reverberating through the chamber. "It must be controlled. It must be kept safe. My people failed to understand it, and they paid the price. But now, I will ensure that it is not lost again." Max felt his breath catch in his throat as he approached the device. There was something undeniably magnetic about it, something that seemed to pull at him, urging him closer. He could feel the power emanating from it, a force so strong that it made his skin tingle and his head spin. It was clear that the girl, this tiny, trembling being who had once been so afraid, now held the key to controlling this power. She was the guardian of it, the last of her kind, the one who could ensure that it didn't fall into the wrong hands. But the weight of the responsibility was immense. The girl had awakened the power within her, and now she was the one who had to ensure that it was used wisely, that it was kept safe from those who would seek to exploit it. Max understood that this wasn't just about saving her, it was about saving the galaxy, ensuring that this power didn't fall into the hands of those who would misuse it, who would seek to control and dominate. He turned to look at her, his heart pounding in his chest. "How can I help?" he asked, his voice steady, but filled with a sense of urgency. He wasn't just a mechanic, he realized. He wasn't just a human explorer. He was now part of something far greater. He was standing at the precipice of something that could change the course of the galaxy. The girl's golden eyes met his, and for the first time, Max saw not fear, but hope. She had found him, and now, together, they would protect the power of her people. Chapter 4. The Final Decision. The chamber was silent, save for the faint hum of the energy swirling within the massive device at the center of the room. The alien girl, now standing tall and resolute, her golden eyes glowing softly, stood before the power that had once destroyed her people. And yet, she was not afraid. She had awakened, and now it was her duty to protect the galaxy from the power that her people had once sought to control. But she could not do it alone. Max and the crew had come to this moment, guided by her trust, and now they were bound by fate. Max stood beside her, his eyes fixed on the swirling energy at the center of the chamber. He could feel the weight of the decision that lay before them. The power, the knowledge, the force contained within this ancient device was unlike anything humanity had ever known. It was a force capable of bending the very fabric of space and time, a weapon that could reshape the galaxy. And yet, the girl, this tiny, trembling being who had once feared him, was now its guardian, its protector, and it was up to her to ensure that it didn't fall into the wrong hands. But as Max looked at her, he knew that he was not just an observer in this moment. He was a part of it. He had a choice to make. They all did. The girl stepped forward, her hand outstretched toward the device, and the air seemed to hum with power. The energy swirled faster, more intensely, as if recognizing her presence. She spoke softly, her voice barely audible. "This is the last chance. If I do not take control, if I fail, everything will be lost." Max stepped beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "You won't fail," he said, his voice steady. "You're not alone." And with that, the girl took the final step forward, her hand resting on the core of the device. The energy surged around them, and Max could feel the power flooding the chamber, pushing against him, pulling him into its depths. It was a force so overwhelming that it threatened to consume everything, to unravel the very fabric of reality itself. But the girl stood firm, her body glowing with a light so bright that it filled the room. Her voice echoed through the chamber as she spoke the final words, "I will protect it. I will ensure that this power never falls into the wrong hands." The light intensified, blinding in its brilliance, and for a moment, Max felt as though he were falling into another realm. The energy surged through the room, through their bodies, and then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The chamber fell silent once more. Max opened his eyes, and when he did, the girl was no longer glowing. She was standing before him, calm and serene, the power now fully contained within her. The room around them was still, the device at the center now dormant. The battle was over. Max knew, in that moment, that the galaxy had been saved, not through destruction or force, but through understanding, through connection, and through trust. The girl had become the protector of an ancient power, and now, together, they would ensure that it remained safe. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: the galaxy would never be the same again.